Next, how education is emerging as a flashpoint in the midterm elections. The issue is front and center in the Wisconsin governor's race. The Republican incumbent, Scott Walker, is squaring off against the state's longtime superintendent of schools. Polls indicate the race is too close to call. Special correspondent Lisa Stark of our partner Education Week went to Wisconsin for our weekly segment, Making the Grade.
It's a raucous welcome on the first day of school at Maple Tree Elementary in Milwaukee. Students cheered on by city and district officials, and Tony Evers, Wisconsin's school chief and the Democratic candidate for governor. 20 miles away in the city of Waukesha, the current governor, Republican Scott Walker, is opening the school year at La Casa de Esperanza, a charter school. Walker, running for his third term, is getting an award from La Casa for expanding school choice. Education is a key issue in this race. 40% of voters say it's their first or second most important concern, edged out only by the economy.
This is our message of the year. I love my public school and I vote.
Heather Dubois-Mornon heads the Wisconsin Public Education Network, a nonpartisan group that advocates for public schools.
It's about making sure that whomever gets elected is held accountable to the highest possible standard of doing the right things for kids in schools.
But how best to do the right things for students is what's at stake in this election.
You couldn't pick a starker difference.
Two entirely different perspectives.
On one side, Governor Walker, who soon after taking office slashed school spending to balance the state budget. And he faced tens of thousands of protesters after weakening unions, pushing legislation known as Act 10 that did away with most bargaining rights for teachers and many other public employees. The anger spilled over into a recall attempt, which Walker survived.
Did you guys go to Mars this morning?
Now Walker is campaigning as the education governor after boosting state money for schools by $636 million in his most recent budget.
Why are you the education governor?
Again, because we've not only made the largest historic investment in state history, which is important, but because of Act 10, because of our reforms, those dollars are overwhelmingly going into the classroom where they have a real impact on student success.
On the other side, Evers, who's been the state's schools chief for 9 years. He argues he's the real school champion, calling for a big bump in education spending, an extra $1.4 billion.
Clearly, my lifelong journey has been all about public education and being a teacher and an administrator. And frankly, I've fought for our schools instead of bringing them down.
School funding has been a political flashpoint in more than half a dozen states this year, including West Virginia, Arizona, Oklahoma, as teachers walked out to demand higher salaries and more money for schools. This passion still playing out in many of this year's election races. In Wisconsin, outside money is pouring into the race from conservative and liberal groups. Both candidates have taken to the airwaves.
And I'll never play politics with our kids or their schools.
In Wisconsin, we're rethinking K-12 education.
One of the big dividing lines, school choice. Walker has expanded charters and, more significantly, voucher programs, which let lower-income parents use state education dollars to help pay private school tuition, something Evers doesn't support, says Jim Bender with School Choice Wisconsin.
I think Superintendent Evers would be fine and dandy having all the education reform models be gone and everything just turn back to the same old district school, that's it, no innovation.
But education professor Julie Underwood calls Walker the private school governor and says traditional public schools are not benefiting from his policies.
In 2011, we took the largest budget cut we've ever had to public schools, and that's never really been restored. We've got schools who are barely staying open. They're worried about meeting children's needs. And, you know, to quote an old movie, they're mad as hell and they're not going to take it anymore.
In a recent poll, 61% of voters said it was more important to increase spending on public schools than to cut property taxes.
What does that say to you?
It says fund our schools. People are begging for it. People are passing referenda, voting to raise taxes on themselves to keep their schools in business at record rates.
Governor Walker believes the property tax measures are passing for a different reason.
And we've done such a good job at cutting property taxes that it's no longer a factor as much as it once was.
Both candidates are pointing fingers at each other over Wisconsin's achievement gap, perhaps the worst in the nation. Black students do not do as well academically as white students. Evers says he's proposed fixes. Walker hasn't funded them.
We need to continue to work on that issue going forward in the state, and we will. But we have to have a properly funded system in order to make that happen. We can't take money away and expect people to have miracles happen in their classrooms.
But Mark Morgan, who heads the state Republican Party, blames Evers' leadership.
Evers has failed to act multiple times in fixing, either failing schools or taking bad teachers out of the classrooms.
And that controversial Act 10 law, passed 7 years ago, it's still creating waves. Walker supporters say districts free from union contracts can now reward top teachers. But opponents, who still gather at the Capitol every workday, argue teacher retirements and turnover are up, leaving less experience in the classroom.
Walker won't be governor someday soon.
A teacher. The race has gotten contentious. Walker accuses Evers of failing to fire a teacher who viewed pornography at school.
Tony Evers should have revoked the teacher's license, but he didn't.
Have you seen these false attack ads?
Evers argues state law at the time didn't allow him to do so.
That's why Tony Evers worked with both parties to change the law.
Even as this battle heats up, educators are putting their efforts into getting students settled for the new school year.
That's it. Say your name.
Dion.
Trying to tune out the political noise, says La Casa school leader Maria Ayala.
We need to get away from all of the politics and really focus in on the children. What are their needs? What can we do for them and for their families?
A focus that will continue long after Election Day.
There you go. You got to work together.
For Education Week and the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Stark in Waukesha, Wisconsin.
It's great having that report from Wisconsin.